Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live edition of Latitude Adjustment Podcast. This is Eric Maddox, your co-host, here with Laila Mokhiber and our guest, whom we'll introduce shortly. Just a quick note about what this is. Latitude Adjustment Podcast is typically an audio-only format, but we've been doing, I think this is our 9th live broadcast. And yeah, to check out the regular audio format, just go to latitudeadjustmentpod.com. And we've coming up on, I think, 70 episodes at this point, and our focus is highlighting underreported places, communities, and issues from around the world. So that a lot of times focuses on human rights issues, but also just communities that in many cases are vulnerable and that you're not hearing much about, or that you're not hearing from directly. So on that note, I'd like to pass it over to Laila, and then we'll introduce our guest for today. But the focus of this show is wildfires. Specifically in the context of the U.S. in part, but also as a global phenomenon.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in. I just would like to ask you first and foremost to hit share on that video so that more people could be tuned into this live conversation. We have two really important guests talking about a really, really timely and underreported topic around wildfires and the impacts that it has on the environment and Indigenous practices. So we're so thrilled to have with us two amazing people who I will let introduce themselves. For those who are new to the show, though, and new to me, I am a friend of Eric's and is co-host as of about 10 episodes ago, a curious person who spends her working hours working on refugee issues, but all other times curious about the rest of the world. And so I invite you to join us on this journey and to really open your mind to things that you may not have learned before and to engage in the conversation. With that said, please use the comments to chat, ask things of our guests, and to share your own insights. We welcome as much curiosity as possible. April, could you let us know kind of where you're coming from and anything you'd like the guests to know? And I'd like to ask you to unmute. There you are.
I have to remember that. Well, first of all, just thanks so much for having me on the podcast / videocast. Is that what we call this? I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about wildfires. I've been covering wildfire mostly in the Western US, but some in Australia and other parts of the world for about 20 years. And I've been a journalist for 20 years. And I'm freelancing right now, mostly for U.S. publications, including Scientific American, and working on a story right now for Audubon magazine. I've written for National Geographic News and Discover, where I was an editor, and Science, which is the magazine of the scientific journal Science, and Nature, ditto, and other publications. And I mostly cover environmental issues, and I've always just been really interested in fire. For my master's degree, I went to the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. I didn't study forestry, but I took some classes, and for some reason, I'm just really fascinated with how forests work and fire ecology and and all the. It's such an interesting story from a journalistic perspective because there's so many different layers, right? You have fire ecology and what's happening with the ecology of it, but then there's also these really interesting social aspects, which we'll get into, I'm sure. So anyway, that's me, and yeah, I'm just really glad to be here to talk about this.
Before I pass the mic to our next guest, I would just like to say I listened to the episode with April and Eric, which happened before I joined the show, and I learned that she also started as a DJ, which is super cool to me. And so I encourage you to go back and also watch or listen to that episode. This is a live built form, but that one is the audio only, to learn more about her fascinating career. And with that, I'd also now like to share the mic with Stephan to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Laila and Eric. It's a pleasure to be on the program with you both today. I'm Stephan Cheney. I'm Lakota from the Kuichasho Oyate in Lower Brule, South Dakota. My people are prairie people, plains people, and I'm calling from the traditional Wiyot territory in what is known as Humboldt County in Northern California. So right on the north coast there. Just right below, I guess, just to, I guess, provide a context where I'm at for folks, is on the way north coast. Oregon-California border. And like I said, traditional Wiyot territories, one of the original land stewards of this area, among many, the Yurok, the Hoopa, the Karuk, the Talawa, all these people that really had a connection to the land and still do, and is really related to what we're speaking about today, right? The traditional land managers, these people, these practitioners of fire ecology, like April is saying, and so forth. And myself, I've had a little over 6 years of fire experience in the so-called, we'll say the wildland environment, all over the U.S. And into Alaska as well, so continental U.S. and just had a really good opportunity to learn about fire from many perspectives, right? Including the indigenous perspective of fire not being this evil, destructing thing, but a sort of being itself, something that you have to have a relationship with when it comes to land management, just approaching that. And so with that, a lot of the fire suppression, not only, but also prescribed fire, the active placing of fire on the ground to manage fire, to manage the land, and so forth. And from there, I've really just grown in many different directions along those same lines. And right now, I'm currently working for the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and just recently being able to help coordinate some of the direct assistance to folks on the ground, to families on the ground that are suffering at this devastation. So thank you.
Thank you both for those introductions. It's really, really important to have you both here and have both your perspectives. And I would like to just start off by saying, first of all, what exactly is happening with the fires in California and the Western United States as far as scale, damage, and frequency? Would you please both give us your perspectives on that? April, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, I thought I'd just start by putting the fires in California in the broader perspective, a global perspective, because I think there's been a lot of media attention on the California fires with good reason. I mean, they're seeing an historic fire year, and there's been devastation, lives have been lost. But this is a worldwide phenomenon. And, there have been fires just this year in Brazil. There's a huge fire in the wetlands in Brazil right now, so we're seeing some really unusual fire activity this year in particular. And then there were fires in Siberia. There were huge fires in Australia earlier in the year and the end of last year. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But, I think if you're only casually watching the news about the fires in California, you're left thinking that this is just a California problem, but it's really happening worldwide. And just to follow up on something Stephen said, fire is a natural part of the ecosystem. I think that gets missed a lot too. But the fire that we're seeing now is behaving in much different ways than so-called natural fire does. The fires we're seeing now are more frequent. The fire seasons are growing longer. Here in the Southwest, they're at least 30 days, I think maybe even more than that now. The last study I saw said, I think 30 days longer. And so we're seeing something that's really unprecedented, I think, in modern history for a variety of reasons. I'll just stop there for now so that Stephen can talk more about the California fires. But, I was just looking at the National Interagency Coordination Center website, which is sort of the clearinghouse for all information about fires, that and INSAWEP, that all of the federal agencies involved in fire fighting and fire management. That's why it's called the Interagency Coordination Center. And that site was saying, yes, as of yesterday, there's 75 large fires as of yesterday burning across the country. So, besides California, we've also seen fires here in New Mexico, and we're seeing them around the West. You've probably heard of the ones in Oregon and Washington that have caused a lot of damage as well. So, so the main takeaway there is just that it's not just happening in California, it's happening globally, and it's also happening across the West right now.
Yeah, thank you, April, for bringing us to that. And I just wanted to add on to what you just said there, to help contextualize for folks who may be unfamiliar with those 75 large fires that you mentioned and things like that, and I guess give the folks some data to help kind of understand where we're at. So the 10-year average for those fires is 6 million acres per year, right? And we're about a million acres above that right now, which isn't super unusual, right? There's been years that have been more acres burned and things and so forth, but I think when we're starting to look at like the size of these fires, and that's one of the larger takeaways, in that in the 10-year average we're at 48,000 fires, and this year we're sitting at 44,000 acres, 7,691 acres burned. And then to just like bring that number in a little closer, it's if we look at the Northwest area, the Northern California area, more than half of those total acres are comprised in those two regions. Something like I think we're looking at like 4,259 acres burned in just the Northwest, so the Washington, Oregon, Northern California region, in about 7,000 fires. So it's just like this half of the acres that are burning in just this small number of fires, right? And so I think those numbers are pretty astronomical when it comes to these things. And I think you know, when we're talking about fire and where we are at, right? The I guess the normal, right? A lot of the things we're seeing are definitely climate driven. This extreme fire behavior. We're definitely seeing like these fires being categorized as extreme more often than not lately in the last 5 to 10 years, which prior to that, you know, it was pretty here and there to have a super large, you know, 100,000 acre fire plus. And, you know, we're also just seeing like the way that they're managing the fires a little different, like larger, the complex fires and things of that nature. And I think we have to also consider, at least in the US, the way that they're managing fire as opposed to some of these other areas like you're mentioning, like in the global south, or you know, even to our neighbors up north of the medicine line in Canada. Just not only the ways that people are living or living in the environment, but also like the approach. So I'd say in the US it's like very and I'm just going to go into it, like firefighting, right? Even the term firefighting, wildfire, all of those things as like the mentality more or less of how they're approaching it. So it's like very aggressive, I would say, in the US in the way they're fighting fire. I've worked with crews from Canada or other places, and they just think the wildland, the firefighters here in the US are kind of crazy for having things like the fire shelters and things like that. You know, they would say like, hey, we don't use those because we try not to put ourselves in those situations. So a lot more air support, things of that nature. So yeah, we're just seeing like, I guess it's important to just consider like the mentality more or less. And I think that all has to do with largely the westward expansion that happened in this country, the colonization, and really the decimation and genocide upon the indigenous peoples. It's directly tied to where we're at today. The land stewards removed, and a lot of these pristine, so-called, well, I'm just gonna quote John Muir, the pristine untouched forests, you know, drastically decline, and pretty quickly, once the first peoples, the indigenous peoples of this country, were removed from the land. And that's not just out here in the West, that's across the world, right? Like we were talking about a little earlier of the Australian land management and how the indigenous relatives out there are really leading that. So yeah, I guess that just wanted to bring in a little bit of the statistics to just kind of share with people where we're at today, and kind of how we got here, just in the brief version.
Yeah, and that's a myth. What John Muir wrote. Yeah. I mean, the forest he was sort of acting like no one had been here before, and these lands were managed for various resources by Native people for thousands of years, and that was totally unacknowledged in John Muir's writings. So anyway, just want to throw it out there.
It's like kind of what we're talking about today too, in that, like, for the indigenous peoples around the world, fire is a natural thing, right? It's always going to be here. We're always going to have fires, and it's important that we work with that, we understand that, and we utilize that in a way that is going to be beneficial for not only ourselves in this Anthropocene that we're living in, but all the flora, the fauna, and all of that, so forth. And a lot of the forestry practices, the Forest Service practices and policies, are also contributing factors to where we are today.
All right, thank you both for that very thorough introduction. And I would definitely want to make sure that we also come back to this issue of indigenous practice related to wildfire management, etc. And please correct me on my use of terminology too. I'm new to the subject, let alone like the decolonized discussion around it, so to speak. So please, I'm here to be educated as well. As far as the fires themselves, I sense that it's important to not just look at them and understand them and discuss them in terms of the immediate damage that's done by the actual fire, but to look at the other effects that are had. And I'd like to hear from you both about what impacts are being had by these fires on economies, on ecosystems, and on vulnerable populations. I will leave it to you to decide who.
Do you want to go first this time, Stephen?
I'd love to hear from both of you.
Yeah, sure. I can totally do that. Thank you. So I can speak to definitely the impact on some of the families and communities that I've worked with over the past couple of weeks. We'll say, like, the economy, that sort of thing. It's definitely, a lot of people are seeing job loss, unable to go to work, things of that nature, just given the broad spectrum of how people are being impacted, not only from the smoke, but actual fire in their community. And we'll say that of the 700 or so applications that I've been able to go through at my work at Seventh Generation Fund, a large number of those are, I'll say, 100 to 150, somewhere around there, are people that have completely lost their homes. All indigenous peoples. Just north of where I'm at right now, actually, one specifically, the Slater Fire in the Klamath National Forest, just really impacted the Native community there. And of course, like, as I'm speaking about this, I can speak to the specific impact on Native peoples, but fire is not distinguishing between any of those factors, right? Those demographics, right? These communities are being impacted across the board, and we're seeing that even due to the economic situations of a lot of indigenous communities, people being unable to even evacuate in a proper way. A lot of folks were just once this Slater fire hit, they were camping in tents in people's yards and things like that. In that way, a lot of people were living in their cars, unaware of some of the services that might be available to them. And up and down in the West, I've heard multiple reports of people going to motels for respite, and the hotels prices being elevated. So we're seeing sort of like I guess I would just say broadly, like this disaster capitalism that happens with some of these things, and it's up and down across the board. That's what we're seeing. We're also seeing, like, as far as the the most vulnerable. I guess it's important to mention, in the most vulnerable, we'll say, like, Indigenous women among the most vulnerable of those populations. Being really impacted as well. There's even less resources available, and things of that nature. And so I would just say that yes, it's being very hard for people, and it's not just the home loss, the structure loss. It's things that you don't readily think about, like the impact on livestock or animals, and everything included in that. There was this woman that was explaining that, all the fences were burned down, and they were having a hard time just getting their livestock in and managed, and they were getting hit by trucks, things like that, burned. And so that's just like the large devastation that can happen when some of these fires come very quickly, and that the not being able to respond in the way that needs to. For example, in that, she said it took 2 days before anybody could get to that fire to do anything, and so how they were managing from there.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a story right now on some of the wildlife impacts of some of the fires around the West. For example, there's a bird in southern Idaho that only lives in southern Idaho. It's the only place in the entire world that's called the Cassia crossbill. Beautiful little bird, and there's only about 2,000 of them in existence in the entire world in this, one patch of forest in southern Idaho. And I was talking to the biologist who's the expert on the Cassia crossbill, and he thinks that up to half the population has perished in the fire that's burning in that area right now. 89,000 acre fire. And again, this forest is fire adapted, but we should also probably mention that different forests are adapted to fire in different ways, and there are some vegetation types that aren't used to fire. This particular forest is lodgepole pine, and typically a major fire would burn through in only once a century or so or more. Whereas here in the Southwest, Ponderosa pines are very fire adapted, and the fire regime historically was like 6 to 13 years. And some of these forest types actually need fire to, for example, open the pine cones. There are pine cones that will only open when they're heated, when they are exposed to extreme heat from a fire, and they'll release their seeds, which certain types of wildlife depend on. So everything is interconnected in these forest ecosystems. So a fire doesn't affect just the trees. It also affects the wildlife, other vegetation. It'll determine, what kind of grasses grow up after the fire. Suddenly there's a lot of light, and that's going to favor certain species over others. And now with climate change, some of these fires, these severely burned areas, are growing back in a different type of vegetation than they were before, because on top of the fire effects, we have the effects of climate change, which is just changing the climatic context that the vegetation grows back in. So it's a pretty complicated question of what all the impacts are and how they relate to and interact with other impacts. But getting back to the wildlife, there's a really great ecologist in Australia where I lived for a while and reported for about 1.5 years. His name is Ewan Ritchie, and he's doing some amazing work looking at trying to characterize the effects on wildlife in Australia, which of course has some of the most unusual and amazing wildlife species in the world that are only found in Australia and often within, very specific places in Australia and nowhere else in the world. And, they saw 12 million acres burn earlier this year over the summer. And they're just now starting to tally up what the damage was to the wildlife there. And the fires burned through areas where there are endangered species that live nowhere else. So you and Richie was saying that it's quite probable that they've lost certain species entirely because of those fires. So, like we said earlier, we're seeing bigger fires, hotter fires, more intense fires, fires happening more frequently and for longer periods of the year than we've ever seen before. And wildlife takes a long time. They can adapt, right? Species adapt. They always have adapted and evolved. But that's usually done over thousands of years. And now basically what they have to do is try to evolve and adapt more quickly. So it remains to be seen whether that's possible. Also, getting back to the socioeconomic impacts, sometimes there's these really rural communities that are most affected, and rural communities tend to be, more disadvantaged than urban areas, and they often don't have the resources, those counties and those communities and states that are hit again and again with these fires every year. And federal agencies, they only have so many resources. So it's also taking a huge toll on the resources that we have to help people in these situations. And then you add COVID on top of that. And, usually you would evacuate to a central place where everyone would gather, but you can't really do that and expose people to yet another risk of COVID-19. And firefighting has become more complicated this year because of that as well. And firefighters camp in really close quarters. And, I'll let Stephen talk more about that since he has experience in that area. But this is just such a remarkable year for wildfire for so many different reasons. At the same time, I feel like it's a wake-up call, or it could be and should be, because this is just going to get worse as climate change advances. And so we have a real opportunity to, use this as a lesson and really get serious about addressing climate change. So.
I'd actually like to hop in there, and on that note about climate change, can we talk about what's causing the fires? A lot of people are attributing it to climate change or climate crisis, climate emergency. Is it suppression, population growth? Are they all, mostly attributable to the same list of causes, or should we be looking at them individually? Stephen, could you kind of start us off on that conversation?
Yeah, thank you. I think that it's definitely, we have to look at it in a holistic way. We can't just focus on putting out the fires. We can't just focus on suppression, and we can't ignore climate change and the impacts that the environment is having on these fires, because I would just in fires, right, it's weather, fuel, and topography. So if our weather is erratic, that's going to have an influence on the level of intensity of the fires, and that's going to have an impact on the land directly. So it's definitely has to be I would say, just in my terms, a holistic approach, and that approach has to include and account for the complete wide range of biodiversity that exists in just this country, but around the world. Like the tactics that we're going to use to engage in fire around here are going to be completely different in the wetlands down that she mentioned earlier, that April mentioned earlier, and to properly manage those things, to not make things worse, we have to be aware of those things. We have to be aware of like what impact it is going to have on the animals, the people, etc. And I think that's where I would like to just again say, it's like we have to consider the indigenous knowledge of those regions, how those regions were managed prior to what we're seeing today. So it is also population. The population does play in a factor, and I kind of alluded to that, and just that the places people are allowed to live or do live around here are completely different than say in other countries where their management is a little different. In Australia, they don't have people living right directly in the middle of the forest on their own, kind of thing. So it brings up so many things, such as terms like defensible space, which again, it's like always this sort of, we're wanting to fight fire and all of that. It's kind of like this bad thing, but it's really, it's more or less speaking to knowing your environment, knowing what, knowing how to really take care of the land. My ancestors, a lot of the ancestors that moved across this country, they even knew how to take care of the land, right? They knew, like, at least to some extent, that they had to be cognizant of the environment, that it was alive, right? It's a living thing. And so looking at things like what plants are beneficial to grow for your space, things of that nature, just considering like this whole approach to how we go about things, right? And touching on a little bit, and I'll let April take over, but the invasive species that can take over and have taken over pre-fire and post-fire. Whenever we're changing the ecosystem, the canopy, the amount of light that is coming in, we're going to see changes to the environment. And so as we go forward, we definitely need to again move towards using fire as a tool, not only to kind of like bring us out of this pit that we're in. The reality is, though, we need to like we need to have so many more people involved in making that happen, right? And go please take over, April.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I guess I would just say, we can't blame these fires entirely on climate change. I think that's one important point. And I think it's also important to remember that these are transformed landscapes that we're transforming even further now. Like we were talking about earlier, tribes have used fire for millennia. And now, though, we're seeing a transformation that human beings have never seen before. So in recent history, you've had about a century of fire suppression. The Forest Service had this great idea around the turn of the 20th century to suppress every fire. Anytime there was a fire on federal land, snuff it out. And that was the policy for about a century. And then about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, as the science advanced on how fire works in the landscape, and we learned that a lot of these forests where we were snuffing out every little fire had actually evolved with fire, and that was an important part of the ecosystem, like we were talking about earlier. And so now our fire policy on paper is actually much better than it has been in the history of the federal government, in that fire managers do try to let fires in remote areas like a wilderness area. The policy is to let it burn, let it do its thing, its natural thing. Of course, that's complicated now, because what's natural anymore? Because again, that landscape wasn't pristine. It looks like wilderness, but it has been transformed in certain ways, and climate change is transforming it further. These areas largely are becoming drier, and the soils are becoming drier. Vegetation is becoming drier, especially in a year like this in California. So these management questions are so complicated now and so challenging. But the good thing is that forest managers have a lot more awareness now of what the forest needs. And there's a big push for forest restoration, which helps restore some of these forests to a more natural state where they can handle, fires a little bit better and make them more resilient when a big fire does come through. Like here in the Southwest, I mentioned Ponderosa pine forests. We have those at middle elevations here in the Southwest, and they're fire adapted, but with fire suppression. And so the natural Ponderosa pine landscape is kind of park-like. You have individual trees with a lot of space between them, and this beautiful understory of grasses beneath. And so that's what a healthy Ponderosa pine forest looks like. But with that century of fire suppression, what happened was, and this has happened in a lot of other forest types too, is that you have a forest that's overly crowded. So you have a lot of these younger trees that have come up during that period. And now the forest looks totally different. You have just this like, it looks like, you know, the New York City of trees, just like trees are people, they're all crowded together, where it really should look like, you know, a rural area with just, you know, spread out trees. And so you can use prescribed fire to try to restore that landscape, or even mechanical thinning, which means removing some of those younger upstart trees to try to recreate that park-like distribution of trees across the landscape. And so then when a big fire does come through, it doesn't burn severely because it has less fuel, and it doesn't get up into the treetops. You know, the most damaging fires are what we call crown fires. And Stephen can talk more about that, where the fire is so intense and moving so quickly that it moves up into the crown. Whereas traditionally, like in Ponderosa pines, it would only burn, you know, the lower third or half of the tree. And that's why Ponderosa pines, when you look at them, their branches don't start until like halfway up the tree. And that was an adaptation to fire. So yeah, climate change is only one factor. You also have the fact that people are moving more into forested areas, you know, especially now that everyone can work from home. You can live anywhere you want. So who doesn't want a cabin in the woods? I mean, I would, but I'm not going to, because that really increases your fire risk. But I feel like, you know, everyone has to be in on this. Like real estate agents have to be honest about the fire risk. If you move into this beautiful cabin in the woods, you know, I think it's only responsible for real estate agents to actually tell people that, you know, we're seeing more fires here, and you could end up losing your home if you live here. So that gets into land planning, you know, which is a local purview, a purview of local officials. And so at every level of government, you really have to have buy-in from officials at all levels to try to address the problem, because it's such a multifaceted problem. So you have climate change. You also have, and I should say climate change is making these landscapes, you know, for the most part, drier. Like in California, I think over the past 40 years, average temperatures have increased about 2 degrees. It's also the increase here in New Mexico. And precipitation in California has decreased 30%. So if you think about it, you know, the forests out there are drier, and they're becoming sort of standing kindling. So when a fire does come through, that's part of the reason we're seeing more intense burns. But yeah, there's all these just right down to the individual decision-making level that are factoring in to how damaging these fires are to communities. So we're having more people move in to these forested areas, and we have climate change, and you know, so many different factors, poor forest management, because a lot of times the kind of management that I was just talking about, where you use prescribed burns to try to mimic that natural fire regime, people complain of smoke. And so if you're trying to do that near a community, like here in Santa Fe, we've had a couple of major fires up near Los Alamos, which is about 45 minutes away, and people complain about the smoke. But the question is, would you rather deal with a little smoke now, or a lot of smoke later when we have the next huge historic fire? But as an example of how good forest management can make the forest more resilient and reduce the impact of unnatural fire, we had a fire just north of town last month that is a relatively small fire, but it did burn kind of close to a community. But when it hit an area where there had been treatments, prescribed burns, the fire laid down, and it burned really slowly, and it didn't burn as hot. So we're seeing evidence all over the place that prescribed burns and these sorts of treatments that we've been talking about that help restore the health of the forest are really beneficial, and they're doing what they were intended to do. So.
Well, I am learning so much from the two of you. This is such an important conversation. I want to welcome all the new viewers who've tuned in since we've kind of started. And I wanted to ask you another question based on kind of the homework I did for the show. I learned a lot about cultural burns. So can you tell the audience, what are they, who uses them, and what is their cultural and practical value? Stephen, could you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you. I think the most important thing to consider in this cultural burn or anything the otherwise is that, like I've stated, for Indigenous peoples, this cultural burning was just a way of life, right? It wasn't just specifically for the relationship value of the fire. It actually serves in many different ways a practical purpose, right? We can look at my ancestors, my Lakota ancestors, lighting off huge swaths of land in the prairie for hunting, for agriculture, for so many different reasons, right? To push buffalo into certain areas. It was an active relationship with the land. And I think that as we're considering the terms, Western science and the cultural value, it's realizing that both of those things are exactly the same, one and the same, in that the firing for effect for whatever it might be in different communities is based in long-standing millennia, as April has said, of knowledge, of like active knowledge, active engagement with the land. So it is all for a purpose, and it does serve a practical value. But not only does it serve like this practical value, as April has said, when in establishing fire breaks and things of that nature, these things that help slow the basically the steam of the fire, right? It reduces the fuel. A lot of native peoples, indigenous peoples around the world have used fire for cultural reasons, such as their basketry. In the region that I live right now, in the Swiat territory, they're very, very known for their beautiful basketry, using hazel, things like that, to weave these complex geometric designs. But those things are dependent upon fire. So Indigenous peoples are actively using fire, not only just for their ceremonial regalia, for the health and vitality of the land itself, but also for themselves, for acorns, for sustenance, for so many different things. And one of those things that I've seen just recently too is also people not being allowed to like go harvest and collect some of those things in this time, right? Due to the fires. And aside from the safety things, I think it extends a little bit beyond that. But there are many indigenous peoples throughout the world that have used fire for this very practical value of managing the land. It's all based in science, and just because there wasn't evidence of it before doesn't mean that it hasn't existed since before time, right? It's kind of catching up to the Western science, is catching up to some of those practices. And I think the important thing, of course, considering all of those things, is how we apply those things today, how state agencies, government agencies are working together to bring this forward in a way that will bring us out of this rut that we're in, basically.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. I want to also just add very quickly that, which I didn't mention in the beginning, it's that I grew up a couple hours south where Stephen's coming from today, and also in Central California. And so while I haven't been there in some time, I mean, part of the motivation for doing this show is also personal. I mean, I'm talking to my own family and extended family and friends back home. And I have to say that I'm also getting an education in where I came from. And so I'm really grateful to both of you for helping me to understand even like my own roots, so to speak. And and some of the things that are also, unpleasant historically that I think I need to know, and that Americans need to know, and that everyone around the world should understand about how their own indigenous communities have been treated, and also some of the unseen impacts that that's had that go beyond the immediate human impacts to our world, literally, and the environment. So I think I want to allow Laila an opportunity to also to give some of her thoughts here too, and then we'll move back with the questions.
Well, no, I really appreciate what Eric said. And, I am a person on the East Coast of the US, but, we're not experiencing as much of these situations. But it is really important for us to know kind of what is happening in terms of policy and the law, since that's the playground that I live at nearby. And so I'm just really grateful to be having this first conversation with you. I also wanted to ask, because you were talking, about the practices, and I think that's unfamiliar to a lot of people, really like our surface level knowledge of what's happening with the fires. Like you're saying, a lot of people just think it's climate change or crisis, whatever the term is that you feel comfortable using. And so they don't really realize what's happening. They see devastation on the news, they see fear, they're, hysterical about it. And there's a lot of reasons to be that way, but I think it would be really interesting. Maybe you can share with us now or later if there's some documentaries, if there's some videos that can kind of really give us a deeper look into the indigenous practices, so that we could be sharing that alongside this. I mean, I'm a very visual person. It's really helpful to kind of see what that looks like, and to hear again more from the indigenous people of our country speaking for themselves, since I feel like a lot of those tactics and voices are not being widely shared. So I just wanted to make that comment. And so if you have something that you want to recommend now or later that we could attach to the show, we'd be really grateful for those recommendations.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple things I could recommend now of just people to look up. It would be to look up, there's a couple of programs that exist here, like TREX, it's TREX, as well as like a couple of different programs such as like Cultural Fire, things like that. Basically, if you look up, if you Google, so we'll just keep it simple for people. If you're able to use Google or a search engine, look up Karuk tribal burning, right? And you'll see so many great articles that that speak to what we're speaking to today in acknowledging all the science and the cultural, practical reasons that are involved in that. And there's definitely a couple of articles that I can share with you guys after this that might be helpful for people to see in such like Australia. There's these really great visuals, Laila, that really show one-to-one what's happening when with the fires, as like fires are going through an area that's been prescribed fire implemented, right? So like the before and after. So there's this great article that does a time lapse, and it shows you how reduced the burns are, the impact, and everything, and everything involved in that. So
great, thank you so much for that tip.
And if April has anything too, in her long experience of working with the environment, with people's, there might be some great things that she could speak to as well.
Thanks. I can't think of a documentary focused on Indigenous, fire management, but there's a book and also a documentary called The Big Burn, which I reviewed for Discover several years ago. So I watched it, and it's a really great exploration of what happened with what was the biggest U.S. fire at the time. In the summer of 1910, there was a big drought, which created really dry conditions, and the fire ended up burning 3 million acres. And the Forest Service was brand new at the time, and they were way over their heads. And I'll just leave it there, because it's an incredible story, as well as being super educational about our history of fire management and our lack of ability to deal with large fires at that time. And it really gives you a really good historical perspective and context for what's happening today, because we're still struggling with some of those same questions today, even though hopefully we've gotten a little bit better about forest and fire management in some ways, but in other ways, we haven't. We're still suppressing a whole lot of fires. So anyway, The Big Burn is the name of that, and I can provide a link later.
Thank you, April.
Great. Thank you both. And we'll make sure to include links to all of this stuff in the post for this episode on the website. So if people go to latitudeadjustmentpod.com/live, or just go to the homepage and you can find it, we'll be posting the recorded version of this broadcast probably sometime in the next 24 hours. And along with that, links to all of this stuff. So whether that's books, Stephen's organization, articles that April has written in the past, documentaries, all of that stuff. And that's true with all of the episodes that we've done in the past. We try to always have action items that accompany these shows, as well as additional educational materials. So for this and anything else we've covered, be sure to check out the website, because there's always going to be extra stuff for you to learn and to share and to take action. So we're down to about 10 minutes left, and I had a feeling this would happen because this is a massive topic. And that I knew that there would be lots to say, especially with the amazing guests that we have here today. So we'll do our best to get to the remaining questions. And this might also just be a reminder that this is a topic that we should be covering on an ongoing basis. So if we can, I'd like to get into who's doing it right, both in the US and internationally. And I know that some of this has already been, kind of alluded to in some of your answers to previous questions, but if you can kind of give us an idea of like in the various ways in which fire management can be done responsibly and on a sustainable long-term basis, like with an eye to the future, so to speak, who's getting it right in the US and outside the US? April, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so glad that we're going to highlight some positive stories, because this can be so overwhelming and depressing, especially if you're learning about some of this for the first time. So yeah, a couple of things come to mind. There's some really cool work going on in Australia where Indigenous fire managers are working with non-Indigenous fire managers to try to improve fire management overall. And, I'll let Stephen talk more about, and we're seeing some of that in the US too, which is very cool. I'll let Stephen talk more about that. But one example that I wrote about was this program that the Nature Conservancy has to try to manage fires in a way that mimics, that allows fires to burn naturally, while also sort of keeping an eye on them. So this is a program that there was a pilot project in Wyoming, and there was a fire happening. I went up and sort of embedded with them while they were doing this. And it's this sort of new way of thinking about fire management where, yes, you're letting it burn, but if there's communities nearby, you still have to monitor and make sure that it doesn't burn structures. And so it's just really fascinating to see firefighters taking this really hands-off approach, which is just so the opposite of what firefighters are trained to do. And so I'm not sure where that stands now. That was several years ago now. But I thought that was a really innovative and interesting approach, because traditionally the only time that fire managers and forest managers would, quote, let it burn would be deep into the wilderness with no people around at all. And so this was an attempt to try to allow fire to do its thing, but also, keep it from causing damage to communities. So I thought that was a really positive development. And it's a good reminder for me to check in on that project and see where it is now. And how far it's gotten. And then I mentioned earlier that the Santa Fe National Forest, just outside of Santa Fe here, has been doing some prescribed burns and forest thinning, and a lot of national forests are doing that all over the West now. So there has been a lot of this sort of, better management of forests happening. The challenges are that, first of all, it's expensive, and we just don't have enough money to do all the prescribed burning that needs to be done in the West. And then secondly, there's often pushback from communities. I mentioned the complaints about smoke here in Santa Fe earlier. And so there's this huge need to just educate people about what prescribed burns do and how they're really, preventative measures that prevent huge fires from becoming, super big and super intense down the road. So it's really important to get community buy-in to see that expand, and also to get more funding to be able to do that. The Forest Service is in this really difficult position where they have to fight so many fires, or at least that's the mentality, that fighting fires is really expensive too. So they have to fight so many fires that they have to, in the past, they've had to borrow funding from other programs, including forest restoration and prescribed fire programs to fight fires. So that drains those resources further. But yeah, you can see good examples of better forest management and restoring fire to the landscape, either by federal agencies or by indigenous groups, or collaborations among different entities all over the West. And that's definitely a positive thing. I just feel like there's not anywhere near enough of it.
Yeah, April said pretty much everything, but I would just like to add specifically in Australia, what basically the collaborative efforts of the Indigenous peoples there and the Australian government to some degree. The collaboration is what's working, right? It's taking our traditional knowledge of how to manage the land and providing the resources, as April has said, which are often understaffed, under-resourced. I'll just touch on it a little bit, but like one shortage this year was definitely the overall people power to engage in fire, and a lot of that due to COVID, right? Due to in California specific, the dependency on incarcerated fire crews to be involved in that. So if we're relying on this sort of, I would just say, really slave labor to engage in these fires, there's something critically wrong with that, right? We need to really reevaluate where we are and how we're engaging in these things. There's no reason, and I can get into that so much with the prison population, but it wasn't until only just recently that they introduced a bill that allowed them to even become firefighters after their prison sentence. So these are all the things that are involved with that, right? Australia, they're doing it great, and there are examples, as April has said, of local collaborations that exist, but really the overall takeaway is it needs to be much more, and we do need to go through that paradigm shift of viewing fire as not this evil thing, but a thing that we need to get back into, reacquainted with, so to speak, right? We need to become aware that fire's always going to be there. There's always going to be fires, and it's important that we learn how to actively live and engage with that for our own health and well-being, and the well-being of our home.
Thank you so much. And I would actually be very curious to know if you know people who were formerly incarcerated that were working on putting out fires and would want to join us for a future conversation. If you know anyone, please. and other people that both of you know. I mean, you two are new to each other through this show, right? But we would love you to bring forward any names and people whose stories you think need to be elevated. You did make a comment kind of about how we need to learn how to deal with fires because they are not going anywhere. But so I'd like to know, what would you want to see done, both of you, in the short and medium term, and how can we get there? April, if you'd like to go first.
Well, building on our conversation that we just had, I think, there definitely needs to be a lot more funding. We have some great programs, both public and private, but they all suffer from a lack of funding. And the second big thing is getting public buy-in and public education, because, I think these big fires, especially this year, are potentially going to make it even harder to get buy-in from the public and educate them about the positive role of fire, because they're seeing so much destruction and it just looks like the apocalypse has descended upon us. So how do you take this damage and destruction and just, fire NATOs. And I mean, it's really, the imagery is so apocalyptic, especially this year, that how do you turn that around and say, well, actually, fire is good. And you should support these low-level slow burns. And here's why. I mean, that's, I think, a huge challenge, even more so now than it has been. It's always been a challenge, but I think after this year, it might be even more difficult. I mean, on the flip side of that, maybe it'll be easier because people see what the consequences are of poor decision-making, right? I mean, all the different factors involved in creating the fire year that we're seeing, it all can be traced back to poor decision-making, whether all the decisions that have been made to get us to this point where we have still runaway climate change, and we've just dawdled, and we've known about climate change for a long time, and climatologists have called for action for decades, and the science has been clear for a long time, and it's just getting clearer and clearer. And the call is becoming increasingly urgent the more we find out from scientists. We're finding that things are happening even more quickly than they expected 20 years ago. So you have these poor decision making both on the climate side and on the forest management side that has brought us to this point in time where we're seeing these huge fires. So you could also make the argument that, well, this should be the ultimate wake-up call, right? We have a solution to hopefully, if not preventing these kinds of fires, at least making them a little bit more manageable. And the way you do that is for prescribed burns. So I could see there also being this opportunity, if you can frame it in that way, that we have a solution and it's counterintuitive. It involves deliberately setting fires, but it's actually going to prevent or at least lessen the intensity and the size of these fires down the road.
Yeah, definitely. It may seem counterintuitive to the general public, and there may be this reluctance to move forward in these things, but it is ultimately the reality of what needs to happen. You talk to any person that engages with fire, they'll tell you that fire is the safest way to manage fire, right? Fight fire with fire. That is based in science and facts and everything right in there. It's much safer to light a fire off of a road or a boundary and let that fire take care and do what it's going to do, as opposed to putting people directly out in there, right? And just that same logic really around your homes, around your areas. And that's what I would like to say is, like, what the Karuks are doing great is equipping people, the layman's people, to be able to do these burns themselves to a small degree, right? Taking hold of the responsibility that we all hold, right? We all have responsibility to take care of this land, including the governments, but and the individuals. And it's to just to trust in the knowledge that's been there for a millennium, right? Since before time. These are the things that were naturally occurring, and it's just and it's not like a you need to do this kind of thing. It's just like, okay, it's like, let's get reacquainted with the place that we live, reconnected with our environment as a being. And I would just like to quote one of our board members of the 7th Generation Fund, Jake Edwards. He says, we all need the same things, right? We all need the same things: clean air, clean water. We have a lot of work to do, but if we can combine our strengths, we can fight for what's right. And that's really the action and the call out is, we have a lot of work to do, and pretending like it's not there or it doesn't exist or things like that, it doesn't make it go away, right? Look outside. If you have the luxury of having a yard, a lawn, you know that you have to manage that. If you let it go, the grass is going to grow out of control, right? There are things that you have to do to take care of things. If you let things go in your home, it's the same thing. This land, this is our home. We need to take care of our home, and we can do that, but we need to be collaborative in that. We need to not just extract indigenous knowledge and then take it and move forward with and how we go forward, right? It has to be collaborative. It has to be together. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
All right. Thank you to both of our guests today. Just one final question before we wrap up and take things out. As I mentioned earlier, we like to have some sort of call to action that's practical for everybody who's listening. And that includes people who are tuning in from outside the US, like myself. So if you have maybe different answers for people in different locations, that of course that's fine too. But what can people do to have some sort of practical impact on how fires are managed? What are some what is a thing or things that people can do today or soon to start changing things for the better? April, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. I would say, first and foremost, support prescribed burns in your community, and the fuel treatments covers prescribed burns and mechanical thinning, the two main ways of trying to restore fire resiliency to forests. And make sure that you support what your land managers and forest managers are doing, but also keep an eye on what they're doing. And there's always a public comment period for projects on federal lands, so read those notices and give them feedback. Tell them what you think. If you want to see more prescribed burns, you can tell them that. And then also just really be careful about who you vote for. Make sure that you're voting for candidates that accept the climate change science, which is overwhelming at this point, and that they have a plan and they're committed to taking action on climate change. And just from a practical standpoint, building on what Stephen was just saying, he mentioned what you can do around your house. The Forest Service has a program called Firewise, and that's basically instructions for how to reduce the fire risk to your house. If you live in a forested area, if you clear around your house, and if you have a certain type of roofing material that makes it less likely for embers to burn and to start a fire on your property, there's a lot that you can do, like move wood piles away from the house, all kinds of things. So if you're just sort of learning about how to live with fire and you're not sure what to do, it feels pretty overwhelming, at least there are steps you can take to try to protect your property.
Yeah, I all of those things, right? The real practical things of managing your space. And I would just it's getting reacquainted with your home and your home as a living, breathing unit, right? Considering what trees are planted there, how they're planted, the grass, things of that nature. And people, there's so many ways I would say that people can get engaged in this. And it is through advocating for policy changes, but it's ultimately it is valuing the knowledge that's there and applying it. So embracing the responsibility that we have, whether you are in the so-called the wildland urban interface, where fire is a common thing for you, and if you're not, if you're on the East Coast or you're in an urban center where fire is not something you see in the same way, there are organizations that you can support, like I mentioned, the cultural fire, or the UROCs, the Karuks, their programs, right? There are programs that you can become more aware of, and like April mentioned, reading up on the literature that's available to really understand where we're at, because it's understanding how we got here to know how we're going to go forward, right? So yeah.
Thank you both so much. Before we sign off, actually, we want to take at least one question from our audience. And I see one from my Aunt Carol, who's coming to us from Chicago area. And she asked, what do your guests feel about Trump's statement saying that the trees are old and just combusting once on the ground for a while and causing a lot of fires versus ecological effects? Does anyone want to speak to her question?
Well, thank you, Aunt Carol, for that question. I think it's just it's the ignorance that ignores our reality, right? And the lack of really attempting to really understand what is happening. It's just such an outlandish statement that they just explode and combust and things like that. These are living things, right? We need to understand them as living things to be able to take care of them, and they don't just randomly combust and explode. Even these trees that are on the ground, just practically speaking, they serve so much purpose for people, and in removing what these trees that are on the ground, there's so much value in I guess that's stewardship, right? That's land stewardship, being able to engage in those things. So I just think those kind of comments are often just based in like either fear, ignorance, or anything of the otherwise, right? Anybody who has had any remote encounter with some of these things, which for many is a reality of their everyday life, that every time the summer hits, they're anticipating fires. They know that it's not just magic happening out of nowhere, that there's no rhythm and rhyme to these things, right? These things are happening for a reason, and it's just to perpetuate this alternative reality is just unethical.
Yeah, don't look to the president for sage information on forest management. I mean, he also said that a while back he called for raking the forests. Remember that comment? So yeah, look to the scientists, and I don't think Trump has shown himself to be that well informed on these issues. So I would take everything he says about forest and fire management with a grain of salt.
Especially considering, specifically out here in California, a large percentage of those lands are federal. It's literally impossible for every individual to have that kind of impact when it's so much of the federally controlled lands, right? Yeah, that's all I really have to say. But
I thank you both for addressing that. It's important, as that's something that you're hearing a lot in the news. We aim to always bring alternative views to the things being reported. I also want to just quickly acknowledge, I see that we have guests from as west as Oregon and west of me, and as east of Switzerland. And so we're really grateful for all the people who tuned into this program, and those who watch the broadcast later. You can continue to pose questions that we will share with our guests. I certainly learned a tremendous amount in just an hour and 12 minutes. And so again, I'm deeply grateful for you both for sharing that and kind of encouraging us to be more mindful about the lands that we live on and our parts as individuals as well as a collective. Eric, do you want to take us out for the afternoon
Sure.
my time?
Yeah, evening my time here in Berlin. I just want to echo Laila's sentiments. Thank you to both of our guests for making time to come on the show and share their expertise and their deep knowledge of this subject. And it's clear to me that we've, again, just kind of scratched the surface here. So this is a topic to be revisited. And also we've clearly introduced some other topics that we should be getting into on the show too in future episodes. So thank you for bringing those topics to our attention as well. And just a reminder, I've already gone over this, I think, at the midpoint in the show, but check out the link for this episode that will be posted after the broadcast is concluded. We'll repost the recording at latitudeadjustmentpod.com. Just look for the tab for live episodes. And also be sure to check out the regular audio version of this podcast. And the best way to do that is just to subscribe. So if you listen to podcasts, you'll find us in most places where you do that, whether it's, I think it's Apple Podcasts now, not iTunes, or any app that you have on your Android phone. You know how it works. If you listen to podcasts, you'll know where to find us, and just subscribe and you'll get automatic updates on when we are going to be doing another show or releasing one. So as far as follow-up items and action items and educational resources, again, we'll post links to all of that stuff, including previous work that April has published and information about Stephan's work and his organization, and documentaries, articles, all the stuff you need to know that our guests recommend, and anything else that we can find. You'll find that just like you do with all of our other episodes that trying to provide educational materials. So thank you to everybody for tuning in. We really enjoy doing these broadcasts and learning along with you, and be sure to share it as well. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I'll say thank you once more. And if you like what you hear, I know we're not meant to give you a million calls to action, but please support our Patreon. That's how the show can continue and to grow. And we wish the continued safety of the people in the areas where these fires are. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.